Today we're going to talk about Planet Resort and why I think it's not a good idea quite yet. So if you guys are interested for a video where we are discussing the likeliness of a game that combines both Planet Coaster and Planet Zoo, then this is the video for you. But before we start with the actual thing, here's a little context to why I'm doing this video. So, in the past couple of months, we've had a lot of discussions about new DLCs, the likeliness of Planet Coaster 2, and so on and so forth. And maybe the one most single insane answer that was there every single time, and don't quote me on that as an official statistic, but I'm quite sure it is definitely very likely that this is the one single answer that came the most, is basically that people are wishing for a game that combines both a Planet Zoo and a Planet Coaster experience, and I called this Planet Resort, well, basically because that was the wording that you guys did use the most, and also I thought it's a good idea. Now, first things first, before we talk about the actual point number one, the builds you can see in the background are from the workshop, so it's not my work. This is a beautiful Lost Garden build by Haribo, alongside some Steam Workshop elements from Hannah Vogt, from her wonderful Steam Workshop Fairground collection. So if you want to check that out, I'm going to put all the links in the description so you guys have that. Anyways, let's talk about point number one, and that is the size, I should say. So first of all, we are living in the year 2022, which for a computer year is a good year because we have had a good amount of new technology dropped to us, starting with a new generation of graphic cards that far outdo the previous one and have a very big leap in performance. So given that this game combining both would be gigantic, it's really required to have that. So the size of a game like that would be absolutely enormous in terms of gigabyte, in terms of how much computing power you'll need. And this, for me personally, unfortunately, is already the first point. I think we are not quite there yet. Even I, with a quite beastie computer, do reach the limits of certain parks relatively easily. And this is given the fact that the computer is mostly maxed out, and I still have issues with performance and with all these problems. Now, that said, it always depends on how much you guys obviously do in your parks and do not do, but the size of the game, with everything that is required to run a game that has, first of all, pleasing the people who want to have roller coasters, and the other thing is pleasing the people who have or who want to build a zoo game, and both of these things combined will need a ginormous amount of content from the very beginning. But that's just number one. Let's talk about number two, and number two is the actual real-life counterpart we need to talk about. Now, the real-life counterpart is basically a park that has both, right? And actually, from my knowledge, there are not that many parks out there who are really, which do have really both. Like, I remember Busch Gardens in a way have something like that, and I remember that certain zoos I know sometimes have like a Ferris wheel or something like that. But like a proper theme park with a lot of coasters and a lot of animals, it doesn't really come to my mind. Maybe there is one, who you never know, but I'm really not sure if there is one, and, well, you guys can comment down below. But I think it's not, it's not that likely that you have both together. And this is, I think, a fair point to be raised, because we have to look at the things that the game has to draw some inspiration from real-life places, from real-life animals, from real-life coasters, and so on and so forth, you name it. And you will easily start to notice that there are not that many examples out there in which both of it is combined. Don't get me wrong, I really do love the idea of having both, because it would relatively easily combine two of my most favorite things in the world. But that's not a personal emotional thing. I try to judge it from a perspective of the doability and the likeliness of its existence. And the real-life counterparts certainly are not the biggest argument for it, because, again, there are not that many, and also it's going to be quite hard to really go for that niche if, well, there is no niche. And so, that's basically the point. But there are more points to it, so let's go on with number three. Number three in that list is the DLC strategy of Frontier and of the Planet games. Now, don't get me wrong. I love the way how we have a continuous support of the games. We had a continuous support for almost 3 years for Planet Coaster, and the same happened for Planet Zoo so far, and we're not at the end even yet, so that's really beautiful. But even with the niches being set, for A being, you know, Planet Coaster as a coaster game, and B being Planet Zoo as a zoo game, even within those, we had favorites and non-so-favorite DLCs for the people. And just to give you a very proper example, Planet Zoo had a DLC that is focused on 5 animals, 4 habitat animals plus 1 exhibit animals, alongside a lot of scenery pieces, which most likely is the DLC type for the builders and for people like me who like to, you know, expand on themes and stuff like that. And then we had a second DLC type, which is the 8 animal type, 7+1, in which we had barely any pieces, but then we had a lot of new animals to a certain continent or theme or whatever, which is definitely more for the people who like to have a lot of animals in their game. And the same happened for Coaster. We had some classic rides and magnificent ride and just some ride DLCs in which we got only rides, which was definitely for the people who wanted more rides and attractions in their park. And then we also had DLCs that were focused more on flat rides and scenery pieces and stuff like that, which was more for the builder people. Again, which was my favorite type of DLC. But these things already in the niche itself did diverge. Now imagine we have all of this in one game. That means we would have not only 2 but 4 types of DLCs if we follow the logic of the previous games. And this would cause some significant issues, because who are you going to please? You know, if we would be to follow that strictly, then a certain type of people, the zoo lovers, for example, would have a drain of half a year, because in every second DLC would need to be something for the other fans. And then you would have one DLC with some rides and coasters and fixes for coasters and stuff, and then the other one would be for animals. And then the coaster fans have to wait half a year. So instead of having all 3 to 4 months an update for your beloved game, you would have all, I mean, technically you do have an update, but it might not be for you. And I think this leads me to the next point. And number 4, the next point, is target groups. Now, that might be a bit weird, but hear me out. So, people want to have a game that is in their niche of, well, basically their favorite content and favorite things they want to do. Now, as you can tell from Planet Coaster to Planet Zoo, the communities have changed quite a bit. While at the beginning, the community from Planet Coaster has mostly stepped over to Planet Zoo because the engine is pretty much the same and, you know, many things felt very similar, you clearly saw that after a while, things started to change. And nowadays, we are at a point where the core Planet Coaster community is kind of back at Planet Coaster, doing their thing. Not as publicly as before, not as obvious as before, because the game is basically in sleeping mode, so to say. However, they went back to what they loved the most, even though Planet Zoo is still supported, and obviously the better game in terms of how the engine works and stuff like that, but it's just not a coaster game, you know? And then you have the zoo community, which kind of, you know, grew around Planet Zoo. And the beautiful thing about this is that there's a whole new community that just kind of grew on its own, and now you have all these people which love Planet Zoo very much. I do too. I love both games. The only reason why I don't play Planet Coaster is basically because the engine is outdated, and I personally would have a hard time choosing. If both games were exactly at the same stage and exactly in the same engine and exactly at the same point of support, I really don't know which game I would be playing. Potentially I would be playing both, but not in the same game. So even I would love to have a separation of both, because I think the focus is just something that has to be, has to be done. The focus has to be set, because that will make a game better. And I'm a very hard supporter of these things, like focus on one thing, because that makes the game better. That said, I'm really not against all of these combinations, and I think we have to talk about one more thing in this list of points about Planet Resort, and then we are going to go into conclusion. So let's talk about the 5th point. And the 5th point is alternative. And I want to bring up an alternative to Planet Resort. And I think if we are looking at what is going on, I think, well, actually I hope that Planet Coaster 2 is maybe on the horizon in the future. Who knows? But what I would love to see in both games, in Planet Zoo and Planet Coaster, is a certain combination of elements. Now, I don't want to see too many things in Planet Zoo, and I don't want to see too many animals in Planet Coaster. However, what I could really see is to have these very likely things that you see very often in real-life zoos or in real-life theme parks. So let's start with the first thing, and as real-life zoos have a lot of children-oriented attractions. So they do have merry-go-rounds, they have some Ferris wheels here and there, they have maybe some small rides, you know, maybe like even a kiddie coaster. These are the things that you will find in zoos and that are a good, well, attraction for people, because, well, they do attract people to also spend their time. I mean, you know, spending a whole day in a zoo can be exhausting for the kids, and so they want to do something else maybe in between. That's a good idea. And these things also work vice versa. So, for example, in some theme parks, you do have specifically animals that do live in the nature in general. So you have got a lot of ducks, you've got some, you know, cranes here and there, you might even have flamingos in certain areas, you have some birds, you could also have some other things like raccoons or like these smaller types of animals, you know, these types of animals which realistically would live in that area anyways, and then they would grant them a habitat without granting them like really a habitat. And I think this is something that could be ported over to Planet Coaster 2, for example. But both of these things are more like an ambience thing rather than a fully proper zoo mechanic or coaster mechanic. It is just that tad bit of additional content to make the atmosphere and ambience even better. And I think this would be something needed to step even once further, to take one more step ahead in both of these games. But that said, this is gonna bring me to the conclusion why I think Planet Resort is not a good thing yet, and we have to focus on that word yet a little bit more in the conclusion. Alright, so all these points lead me to one point now, and this is the conclusion. I think we are not ready for a game like that because of all these reasons I brought up. However, I think it is fair to say that in the future, where maybe both games, Planet Coaster and Planet Zoo, got a successor, maybe Planet Coaster 2 and Planet Zoo 2 would be a little bit closer together than they have been now. In my perfect world, we would see a Planet Coaster 2 next year, and then maybe a Planet Zoo 2 the year after, or even maybe 1 year after, so that the time frame between both is not too big, and so the difference of both games might not too big. And then fast forward a couple of years more, if Frontier is going to continue that very successful franchise, I might see this coming together at a certain point. Once the technology and the computing power on average is just there. And I think chances to bring this together in terms of computing power are definitely given. You know, if it's going to be like a strategy, if you want to do it yes or no, that's a totally different story, as we talked about in today's video. But in general, I think there has to be some things happening before we reach a point like that. I don't rather see a very good successor of Planet Coaster and obviously a very good successor of Planet Zoo first before I see a Planet Resort kind of thing. Could it be its own? Could it be a Planet Resort that focus on something else? Maybe on building like the infrastructure around, and then maybe give not that many options? Well, who knows? And there's also one more thing I wanted to bring up, and I'm not sure if that's gonna work or not, but I could see in the future a combination of both games in terms of having a Planet Resort or Resort as the combination of both. It's almost like a deluxe edition that costs double the price. So here's my thought on that. So just imagine we are not going to get a Planet Coaster 2 or a Planet Zoo 2, but what we're going to get is a Planet Coaster Max, whatever, I don't know, plus, let's call it plus for the time being, which means that this is going to be something like Windows does now, that there is not going to be a proper successor, but the game is going to be ongoingly supported and advanced and so on and so forth, because the engine can be ported over. So it's almost like a subscription model rather than an actual fully fledged game that you buy. So let's say you don't buy Planet Coaster Plus, but you subscribe to it for like a monthly fee of $4.99, just as an example. And then you do have Planet Zoo Plus in the future, which is again $4.99. And both are games on their own, but they're running on the same engine. And imagine that then you can add both up. That's basically the deluxe edition of both, is Planet Resort, which combines both things, and you can have your theme park and your zoo connected together as a resort, and then you build the infrastructure around it. You can connect them with trains, and you can make people go from one park to the other, but not like directly interact with each other. So both games could share certain things, you know, because it's the same engine, it's the same model, it's the same franchise, but they're not technically the same game. And in order to play it as the same game, you would need that bridge, which is the Planet Resort kind of thing. And you could visit both parks, and you could go into both parks, and you might even be able to start certain things from Planet Resort, you know, that jump from one to the other, and you just have a little loading time in between. These things could be something absolutely amazing for the future. But now let's hear your thoughts on it, because I wanted to make that video as a little bit of a starting point to a discussion. What do you think? And also, far more important than that one question is, if Planet Coaster or Planet Zoo is not going to be the next Planet game, what would it be? What else would you love to see? Planet City, Planet Hotel, Planet Golf? I don't know, they just registered all the types. And honestly, I don't have an idea. I don't really have an idea. I don't know. I'm totally open to whatever Frontier is going to do with that franchise, but let me hear your opinion. Thank you so much for listening to this video. If you guys liked it, please make sure to subscribe to the channel for more content of Planet Zoo, Planet Coaster, and all these discussion videos as well in the future. And yeah, there's more cool stuff coming, especially to Planet Zoo and the Sicily project. So keep an eye on that. Have a good day. Thank you so much, and goodbye.